The last thing Halbert Whitlow did at the weigh office, he did slowly. He did it the way a man does a thing he knows he will not do again. It was the 14th of October, 1989, and the low light came in through the dusty west window, the color of old straw. He laid his steel T-square flat against the open page of the logbook. He drew one line, clean and level, the way he had drawn every line for 35 years. Then he squared the edge of the square to the desk, because his hands did that whether he told them to or not. He did not write a weight that afternoon. There were no more loads to weigh. There would not be again. The co-op board had voted in August. The rail spur had come up in September, and the last of the corn had gone 40 miles east to the new terminal. The bins behind him stood empty and swept. The pit beneath the great scale had been cleaned of its last dust. But Hal turned the book to the next clean line anyway. Above the date he wrote a single word in pencil, and he pressed so hard you could have read it from the back of the page. Cordy. He looked at the word a long while. Then he closed the book and set it on its metal rack. He locked the lower drawer of the desk with a small brass key. He slid the key into the breast pocket of his coat, over his heart, where a man keeps the things he means to carry. Outside, the wind had come up out of the northwest the way it does in October. It carried the smell of cut stalks and the first cold edge of the year. He nailed boards crossways over the weigh office door, square nails, the old kind. On every nailhead he set a small dab of red paint from the tin he kept for marking the cars. It was the same red he had used 10,000 times to say, "This one is weighed, this one is counted, this one I have accounted for." He did this without hurry. When it was done, he stood out in the gravel lot a long while. He looked up at the elevator, gray against a graying sky, the tallest thing for 20 miles in any direction. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he has loved and worked and cannot keep. Then he turned up his collar and walked home. He did not speak of it to anyone, and in the spring of 1991 he was buried 2 miles east under a stone that gave his name, his dates, and nothing else. 35 years later, his daughter was mopping a hallway in North Platte at 4:15 in the morning. Cordelia Whitlow was 58 years old. She had been the overnight custodian at the Prairie Rest Inn off the interstate for the better part of a decade. She knew the building the way you know a thing your hands have touched 10,000 times. She knew which wheel on the mop bucket dragged and pulled the cart to the left. She knew the fluorescent tube above the ice machine that ticked when it warmed and went quiet by dawn. The night clerk, Donna, took her break at 3 and came back, smelling of the menthol cigarettes she smoked by the dumpster. The trucker traffic thinned to nothing between 4 and 5. Those were the best hours, the empty ones, when the only sound was the hum of the soda machine and the soft drag of her mop across the tile. Cordy did not mind the quiet. The quiet was the part of the job she had stayed for. She poured her coffee black and ate her toast with peanut butter, the same as every morning for 35 years. Not because she loved it, because the price of it had never much moved, and a thing you can count on is worth something. She kept her hair short because it was easy. She lived alone in a one-bedroom on Jeffers Street, with a recliner and a television she rarely turned on. And she had a habit nobody knew about. Whenever a pencil came into her hands, she sharpened it to exactly 2.5 inches. Then she set it down in the drawer and never wrote a word with it. She had a whole drawer of them. She could not have told you why. Her hands simply did it, the way some people fold a napkin into a triangle, the way the body keeps a thing the mind has let go. The telephone rang at 7:15 just as her shift ended, and the day clerk came yawning through the back door. The woman said her name was Mavis Crandall, and that she did the bookkeeping for the city of Cordwood. She was sorry to call so early. Was this Cordelia Whitlow, daughter of Halbert, who used to run the elevator? Cordy stood in the break room with one arm still in her windbreaker and said that it was. Mavis explained it slowly. The way you explain a thing to someone you suspect is not quite hearing you. The city had taken title to the old co-op weigh office years back for unpaid taxes. The council had finally voted on what to do with it. They would sell it for $5 to anyone who signed an agreement to preserve the building rather than tear it down. There had been some on the council who wanted to just let it fall. Then Mavis said the thing that made Cordy sit down on the break room bench. "Your daddy would have wanted it kept, honey. He told me so himself, the year before he passed. Came in to pay his water bill and stood at my counter and said, 'Whatever happens to the rest of it, somebody ought to keep the weigh office.'" Mavis paused. "He said a man's work ought to leave a mark." Cordy did not remember hanging up the phone. She remembered standing in the parking lot afterward with her keys in her hand. She remembered that her hand was shaking and that she watched it shake and could not make it stop. She had not spoken her father's name aloud in 35 years. She had not set foot in Cordwood since the spring of 1981. That was when her mother stood in the front hall with her arms crossed and called her an embarrassment to the family and the name of Whitlow. Her father had stood 3 feet behind her mother. He had looked at the floor and said nothing at all. Cordy had been 20 years old. She had carried one suitcase out the door at 3:30 in the afternoon, and she had not gone back. Not that winter when she lost the baby in a rented room in Omaha. Not for any holiday. Not even for the funeral in 1991. Earl Riggins had called a number she did not know how he had found. She said only that she could not come, and hung up before he could ask her why. But a thing was pulling at her now, low and steady, like the current you cannot see under the smooth top of a river. She drove home and lay down and did not sleep. By noon she had folded 3 days of clothes into a canvas bag and put it in the trunk. She pointed the old Buick east. The prairie unrolled in front of her the way it always had, flat and enormous and patient, the fields cut to gold stubble, a center pivot somewhere turning slow against the white sky. It is 4 hours from North Platte to Cordwood if you do not stop, and Cordy did not stop. She came in on the old county road past the section lines she had known as a girl, past a Quonset shed gone to rust, past a farmhouse with a tarp on its roof. The town rose out of the flatness the way these towns do, a water tower, a steeple, and the grain elevator standing over all of it like the last word in an old argument. The sign at the edge of town said Cordwood, and below it, population 287. Somebody had crossed out a larger number and written the new one in. Cordy remembered when the number had been near 1,000. She remembered the Saturday Main Street, the line of trucks at harvest, the cafe that had a different pie every day of the week. She remembered a great many things she had spent 35 years telling herself she had forgotten. She got out of the car in the gravel lot below the elevator. The first thing she heard was a meadowlark, off in the cottonwoods along the south fence, pouring out that long liquid song they sing at the cool end of the day. The cottonwoods had already gone to yellow. She stood there in her custodian's windbreaker, with the hotel's blue logo stitched over the breast, a woman of 58 who cleaned rooms for strangers. She looked up at the elevator her father had run for 40 years. She felt very small and very far from anything she understood. She felt like a girl who had walked out a door and never been allowed to walk back in. She signed the papers at City Hall at 11:23 the next morning. The mayor was a soft-spoken man named Lou Deming, who could not have been past 40, which meant he had been a child when the elevator closed. He laid the deed on the counter and uncapped a pen and watched her sign her name, Cordelia A. Whitlow, the same name she had signed on 100,000 time cards and never once on anything that mattered. Deming slid the $5 receipt across to her. Then he stood a moment longer than was comfortable. Some folks on the council wanted to let it fall. I'll be honest with you. He looked at her in a way that was almost shy. But my granddad hauled corn to your daddy 30 years, said Hal Whitlow, never once shorted a man on a weight, not in 40 years, not even the year he had every reason to, said an honest scale was a rare thing. Deming handed her a single brass key the city had turned up in a file drawer. Seems right it comes to you. Cordy did not ask him how a man that young carried a thing like that about her father. She put the deed and the key in her coat and walked the 2 blocks down to the elevator alone. The way office sat apart from the main elevator. It was a small clapboard building all its own, set across 30 feet of cracked concrete, with one window facing the rail bed and one facing the platform of the scale. It was the size of a one-room schoolhouse and shaped a little like one. The door was still boarded over. 2 planks, crossed in an X, and on every nailhead faded by 35 winters but unmistakable still, a small dab of dull red paint. Cordy stood in front of that door a long time and did not move. She knew that red. She had grown up watching her father mark the hopper cars with it. A quick dab to say, this one's been across the scale, this one's done, this one is counted. She had not known, in all the years she had hated him for his silence, that he had marked the door of his own office the very same way. She reached out and laid her hand flat against the gray-weathered wood, and the wood was warm, warmer than the cold October air around it, as if something inside had been kept and was keeping still, and had only been waiting all these years for a hand to come and feel it. She did not open the door that day. She was not ready, and she knew enough to know she was not. She drove out the section road to the old Whitlow place, which belonged to a family named Sorensen now. She stopped the Buick at the end of the lane and looked at the house where she had been a girl and did not drive up to it. Then she found the only motel within 20 miles, a 6-room place out by the highway, and she slept for 14 hours straight. The way you sleep when you have carried a thing a long way and finally set it down. It was Earl Riggins who found her the second day, because in a town of 287 souls there is no such thing as a stranger for long. Earl was 78 and lived in a cottage a quarter-mile up the road. For 30 years he had run the grain dump for the co-op. That meant he and Hal Whitlow had worked the same lot through the same harvests and the same brutal Octobers. The trucks would back to the highway and the dust would hang in the floodlights till midnight. He came up the gravel slow, leaning on a cane cut from a hoe handle. He stopped a good 10 feet off and looked at her a long moment without a word. Then he took off his cap and held it against his chest. "You look just like your daddy did," he said, the day he stopped speaking. Cordy did not understand the words, but she felt them go in below the ribs and lodge there. She asked him what he meant. Earl looked off past her toward the elevator, quiet a moment, gathering it up. Then he told her. After she left in the spring of 1981, her father had gone quiet, not all at once, by inches. He'd still come and weigh the grain. He'd nod at a man across the scale. He'd write his numbers neat as ever. But the talk went out of him. 6 weeks, near as I could mark it, the man didn't say a word to me that wasn't a weight or a truck number. Earl turned the cap slow in his hands. I asked him one morning was he all right. He stood there a minute, then he said, "I let her go without a word, Earl. Seems only fair I keep it that way a while." And that was the whole of it. 40 years I knew Hal Whitlow. Worked beside him through every harvest there was. That one sentence is the most he ever told me about you. Cordy stood in the gravel and did not trust herself to speak. After a while she asked Earl if he would help her open the door. It took the two of them the better part of an hour. Earl held the pry bar braced while Cordy worked the old square nails loose, one at a time, because his hands shook too much now to do the fine part. He showed her how to set the flat of the bar against the board rather than the edge, so the soft old pine would not splinter up into the heel of her hand. He showed her to rock the bar rather than yank it, to ask the nail out rather than tear it. "A 40-year nail'll come clean if you're patient with it," he said. "Fight it, and it'll take the board with it and a piece of your palm besides." The nails came loose one by one and dropped into the gravel with a small dull sound. The flakes of red paint came away on Cordy's fingers. When the second board swung free, the door drifted inward on its own slow hinge. The smell that came out to meet her was dust and old grain and machine oil and 35 years of standing still. Inside, nothing had moved. The desk stood beneath the scale window where it had always stood. The great Toledo beam ran along the wall, its brass dulled to the color of an old penny. The logbook sat on its metal rack where her father had set it down. There was a white coffee cup on the windowsill with a brown ring dried into the bottom. A wall calendar from 1989 hung open to the month of October. There was dust on everything, the soft gray dust that takes decades to lie down so deep, dust like a snow that never melts. Cordy stood in the doorway and could not make herself step over the sill. To step in felt like stepping inside a breath someone had been holding for 35 years. Then she crossed the floor and opened the logbook. The pages were ruled in her father's hand, every line drawn level with the square, every entry set down in the same patient block print he had used her whole life. Dates down the left, truck numbers, 3 columns of figures, gross and tare and net. The arithmetic of a working life, page after page, the corn and the milo and the winter wheat crossing the scale and being weighed and counted and sent on down the line. Cordy turned the leaves slowly. She came to the last page he had written. There it was at the top, October the 14th, 1989, and below the date the single word pressed deep into the paper, Cordy. She had to sit down in his chair. She turned back through the book a while without knowing what her hands were looking for. She landed in the deep of the winter of 1971. There, tucked between a Tuesday's weights and a Wednesday's, her father had written something that was not a number at all. Cat got in again last night. Orange Tom, half froze, no collar. Set him on the tear plate by the stove. Won't run him off. A man ought to let a small thing be warm when it's cold as this. Cordy read it twice. She tried to fit those words to the man she remembered, the silent man in the front hall who studied the floorboards while her mother put her out of the house. The two would not fit together. She sat there holding the two halves of her father in her two hands and could not make them meet. She turned the pages on. The lower drawer of the desk was locked, just as Mavis had warned. She had no key that would fit it. But up on the shelf behind the iron scale weights, she found a small cloth sack closed with a drawstring. When she worked the string loose, 30 kernels of dried corn rolled into her cupped palm, each one hard and dark as a wooden bead. On each single kernel, in pencil lines so fine he must have used nothing but the very point, her father had written a year. She turned them in the light to read them: 1959, 1962, 1967, 1974, 1980, on up through 1989. 30 kernels and 30 years, one saved out of each harvest he had weighed. Cordy rolled them in her hand and had not the first idea what they meant, only that he had kept them, that he had numbered them, that whatever a man troubles to count and keep, he keeps because somewhere in him it matters more than he can say. She found the thing that frightened her near the end of that afternoon as the light went long and amber across the floor. She had turned back to the spring of 1981 to the month of May, half hoping and half dreading to find anything at all. The entries there were only weights, truck after truck, the ordinary commerce of an ordinary planting season. But in the narrow margin beside the entry for the 8th of May, her father had written one word in pencil. The 8th of May was the very day she had carried her suitcase out of the front hall at 3:30 and gone. It was small, set tight against the edge of the page, as though he had not wanted even the paper to see it plain. Still, that was all of it, not a sentence, not a reason, just the single word set into the margin the way you might set one small stone into a long wall. Cordy sat in her father's chair in the failing amber light and looked at it and could not for anything understand what it was meant to mean. Garrett came on the 3rd day. She knew the car before she knew the man, a clean gray sedan that had no business on a gravel lot. Then the door opened, and a man got out in a pressed suit with a leather briefcase. Even across 35 years, she knew her own brother by the particular way he stood, weight on his heels, chin a little up. Garrett Whitlow was 55 now and sold real estate down in Lincoln. He had been 15 the spring his sister was put out of the house, old enough to understand exactly what was happening, too young or too afraid to put himself in front of it. He had said nothing then either. He crossed the lot toward her now and did not move to embrace her, and she did not move toward him. The 35 years stood up between them like a third person in the lot. "Cordy," he said. "Garrett." He set the briefcase flat on the hood of his car and got down to business straight off, the way certain men do when they are afraid of the feeling waiting underneath it. He had been working a while to acquire the weigh office himself. He had an offer standing with the city. He had a buyer lined up who would take the whole elevator parcel and clear the lot for a modern grain handling outfit. It would, he said, actually bring a few jobs back to a town that was dying. He said the word dying like it was a card that won the hand. Then he slid a single sheet of paper across the hood toward her. He would give her $50,000 for the deed, cash today. She could go back to whatever life she had built and let the past stay decently buried where it belonged. Cordy looked at the paper a moment. Then she looked at her brother. "It's not for sale," she said. His jaw set hard, the old family set. He started in about historic preservation statutes and intent to abandon, about how a structure not brought up to code inside a year could see the sale reversed. His voice climbed, not into a shout. The Whitlows had never been shouters. It climbed into that flat, cold register the family used in the place of shouting. Cordy let him run all the way to the end of it. Then she reached out and picked up his sheet of paper and folded it once down the middle and set it back on the hood beside his hand. She walked into the weigh office and pulled the door shut behind her. She left her brother standing in the gravel with his briefcase and his buyer and his town that was dying. She stayed in Cordwood. She could not entirely have said why. She told herself it was the paperwork, the code inspection he had threatened her with, the simple fact that she had nowhere she was due back. None of that was the true reason, and she half knew it. The true reason was the warm wood under her hand. The word still in the margin, the 30 kernels of numbered corn. And the feeling, growing by the day, that this cold little room was trying to tell her something her father had never managed to say while he lived. Word got around the way it does. By the end of the first week, men she did not know had begun to slow their trucks on the county road and lift 2 fingers off the wheel at her, the prairie wave. A few of them stopped. An old farmer named Dietz, who had hauled to Hal for 30 years, came and stood in the doorway with his cap in his hand. He looked at the Toledo scale a long while. He said he'd weighed his first corn across that platform in 1961, a boy riding with his father. Hal had read him the weight and shook his hand like he was a grown man, and he'd never forgotten it. He asked, almost shy, whether the scale still worked. Cordy said she didn't know. She found out that afternoon that it did, because the next morning, Dietz came back with a pickup bed, heaped with shelled corn from his own bin. Not because he needed it weighed. He had a scale of his own out at the place. But because, he said, a thing ought to be used, and it had been a long time since anybody crossed that platform. Cordy weighed it. She set the truck on the scale and read the gross. She had him pull off and read the tare. She did the subtraction in her head the way her hands remembered. She wrote it in a fresh logbook she had bought at the drugstore in town, the first new entry under that roof in 35 years. Dietz looked at the number and nodded slow. Honest scale, he said, like it settled something. He drove off. Cordy stood in the door the way her father must have stood, and watched the dust hang in the road behind him, and felt the use come back into her own 2 hands. Earl came by most days, slowly across the better part of a week. He gave her back the old work, or rather, her hands took it back while he stood and watched and corrected. He showed her how to true the great Toledo scale. You set the known counterweight on the platform, 50 pounds of cast iron worn smooth and dark by 1,000 hands. Then you watch the long balance beam to see whether it comes to rest dead level against its pointer. He showed her that if it hung off true, you did not force it. You reached up under the housing and tapped the steel bearing at the fulcrum with the side of your fist. 2 raps, 3, to free it where the old grease had gummed and stiffened. Then you let it settle on its own and read it again. Cordy did it once wrong and he stopped her hand. She did it again, and the beam swung down and hung level and true. Earl grunted and said her father could not have done it cleaner. Cordy found that her eyes had gone hot, and she had to turn and look out the railbed window a while. He taught her the corn, too. He shelled a few kernels off an ear someone had left on the platform and told her to bite one. She did. It gave under her teeth like soft wax, and Earl nodded. Over 15, that one. Won't store. It'll heat and spoil in the bin. He had her bite a kernel off a drier ear. This one shattered dry and sharp against her teeth like a seed of glass. Under 13. That one'll keep clear to summer. Her father had taught her exactly that she remembered now, standing on an upturned bucket at the scale when she was 8 years old. Bite it, Cordy. Tell me what it says. She had let it go like everything else. Her teeth had kept it the whole time. And Earl talked, the way the old will talk at last when someone will only itsils and listen. Through him the town came back to Cordy in pieces, and her father with it. He told her about the year of 1986. The interest rates had run clear up over 21% a few years before. The men who had borrowed against good land in the fat years could not carry the note when the lean ones came. One by one the bank down in Lincoln took them. The Hendersons first, then the Pyle place, then near half the families along the East Section Road. He told her how the railroads had been turned loose to charge what they pleased after the law changed at the start of the decade. The big companies built their own terminals out along the interstate, great concrete things where a unit train 100 cars long could be filled in a single day. A little country elevator that took one farm truck at a time at one honest scale could not stand against that. It was never built to. The co-op lost 2/3 of its grain in 1 year. He said it quiet, then he said the rest. Last day the place ran, your daddy weighed 47 cars across that scale in one shift, worked it straight through, didn't stop to eat. Got every last bushel of that harvest moved before they came and pulled the spur, and when the last truck went out, he stood right there in that door and watched the empty bins, and he never said one word, just stood. I was the only one left to see it. Earl looked at the doorway as though the man might still be standing in it. Wasn't about the money for Hal. It was that he had a thing he did honest, and they took the doing of it away from him. That's a particular kind of dying. Watching the use go out of your own 2 hands. Cordy went back to the logbook every evening after that. Now she read it with different eyes, and she began to see the second thing written underneath the first. It was small, a letter here, a word there, always in the margin, always in the fine pencil. She found her own 5th birthday in the spring of 1968, marked beside a Thursday's weights with a single letter C, and beneath it the word OK. She found the week of her high school graduation in 1979, marked the same quiet way. She found again that May of 1981, and the loan's word still standing in the margin. And she understood at last, sitting in his chair in the lamplight, what her father had done. He had kept two books inside the one all along, the public ledger of the grain, that everyone could see. And underneath it, in the margins where no man would think to look, a private ledger of his daughter. He had gone on keeping that second one long years after she was gone, marking the dates that mattered, counting her over and over the same way he counted everything that crossed his scale, quietly, in pencil, where it would not show. She started counting after that. She could not help it. She went through the years one by one with the lamp pulled close and a pad of paper at her elbow. She found that the marks were not only beside the big dates, they were everywhere once she knew to look. A small pencil tick set into the margin at the foot of certain pages. Faint, regular, easy to take for a smudge. She thought at first they were nothing. Then she saw that they fell in a rhythm. They fell on Sundays. Every Sunday. Not a few. Not the ones near her birthday or near some date that meant a thing to him. Every single Sunday, week after week, year after year, a small tick down in the corner of the page, like a man marking off the days of a sentence he was serving. Cordy ran her finger down them and her breath came short. She counted a year of them. She counted another. The ticks ran on through 1982 and 1983 and 1984, on past the dead elevator into 1989. Then they stopped, because the logbook stopped. But she had the awful certain feeling sitting there that they had not stopped at all, that somewhere they went on. She did not know yet what the Sundays meant. She only knew her father had marked every one of them for years, the way you mark a thing you are waiting for, and that she had been 3 hours with the whole time, and had never once thought to wonder what he did on a Sunday afternoon. The cat came on the fourth evening, while she sat with the ticks. It came in the way cats do, as though it had always lived there and had only stepped out for the afternoon. A half-grown orange tom, no collar, one torn ear. It crossed the floor without a glance at her, jumped up onto the platform of the scale, and lay down on the small steel tear plate beside the beam. Exactly where the cat in the 1971 logbook had lain. Cordy went still in her chair. She watched it fold its paws and shut its eyes and begin, after a moment, to purr low in the dusty quiet. She did not run it off. She remembered Havar's line in the book, a man ought to let a small thing be warm, and she let it be. She found a can of tuna at the motel that night and brought it back the next day. After that, the cat was simply there, on the tear plate, every evening the way a thing comes home. She named it Tear, for where it slept. Tear is the weight of this empty thing before you fill it. It seemed to her the right name for a creature that had walked in out of nowhere and claimed a place that was waiting. Mavis Crandall came by that same week, the bookkeeper from City Hall. A square, steady woman of 60-odd in a quilted vest. She brought a coffee cake on a paper plate and stood in the doorway and looked around the weigh office with wet eyes. And she had known Hal, she said. Everyone her age had. Then she told Cordy a thing she would turn over for a long time after. For years after the elevator closed, right up until he got too sick to drive, Hal Whitlow had come into town every Sunday afternoon, regular as church. He'd walk down to the boarded-up weigh office, let himself in the back, sit a while, and walk home again. We all thought he was just an old man missing his work, Mavis said. Folks felt sorry for him. Nobody asked. You didn't ask Hal a thing he didn't offer. She set the coffee cake on the desk. I'm sorry, honey. I think we should have asked. After Mavis left, Cordy sat a long while in the dark with the cat warm against her hip and the lamp off. The ticks were in the book she could no longer see. A thing was working its way up in her that she did not yet have a word for. Her father had not been missing his work. He had been keeping an appointment. Every Sunday for years, an old man had walked down to a board door, let himself into a cold, dead room, sat there a while, and walked home. Everyone in town had felt sorry for him. No one had thought to wonder who he was sitting there waiting for. If you have come this far into Cordy Whitlow's story, take 1 second and subscribe, because what she found next is the part I have waited the whole way to tell you. She found the postal forms on a Sunday morning. They were in the top drawer of the desk, the one that had never been locked. A thick sheaf of yellowed postal service receipts held together with a paperclip gone to rust. Forwarding records, one every few weeks, running back to 1981 and forward all the way to 1991. Every single one of them directed a small parcel to the same address down in Lincoln. Cordy frowned over them. The address made no sense. She had never lived in Lincoln in her life. She had gone to Omaha that spring of 1981, 3 hours the other way, and stayed near it ever since. If her father had wished to send her anything, he had her Omaha address, from the one short cold letter she had mailed her mother and never had answered, so why on earth Lincoln? She read the line again, and then her hand went still on the desk. Lincoln Bus Station, locker number 47. She remembered it then, the way you remember a thing from the bottom of a deep dark well, the water closing back as fast as it surfaces. The day she had left Cordwood in 1981, broke and 20 and far too proud to walk into Omaha carrying nothing, she had stopped at the Lincoln station between buses. She had rented a steel locker and shut her one good winter coat inside, meaning to come back for it the moment she found work and could afford the fare to fetch it. She never came back. She had paid for 1 month and then forgotten the locker entirely, the way you forget a thing you are too frightened to let yourself remember. She had told no living soul. She was certain of it. Absolutely certain she had told no one on this earth, but her father had known. Somehow, across all that distance and all that silence, her father had known. For 10 years, every few weeks, he had mailed something to a bus station locker in Lincoln that by every rule should have been emptied and re-rented inside 30 days. Cordy sat with the brittle receipts in her lap. The arithmetic would not come right. Except that it did. The only way it could come right was if that locker had never once been re-rented in all those years. If someone had quietly paid to hold it open, season after season, year after year. A small steel door shut against the day a daughter who was never coming might finally come. She took the receipts to Earl, because Earl was the only one left who might know. She laid them on his kitchen table and asked him straight out how a bus locker stays rented for 45 years. The old man was a long time answering. He got up and put the kettle on, which is what a man does when he needs his hands occupied. He stood at the counter with his back to her. Then, finally, he said it. Hal had come to him in the spring of 1990, when the sickness was already in him and he knew the shape of where it was going. He'd given Earl a coffee can with cash in it and a slip of paper with a locker number and made him promise. He said, "Keep it paid, Earl. However long it takes," he said. "She'll come for her coat someday, and when she does, I don't want her to find an empty box and think nobody held her place." Earl turned around then. His eyes were wet, and he was not ashamed of it. "When the can ran out, I kept paying it myself. Wasn't but a few dollars a year. I'd about forgot why some years. But a promise to a dying man isn't a thing you let lapse." He set a cup of tea in front of her she did not drink. "He was sure you'd come, Cordy. Surer than I ever was. I'm glad to my bones he was right and I was wrong." She found the little key the next morning. Earl brought her the wallet at last. Her father's billfold, which he had kept all these years in a drawer of his own and never known quite what to do with. Cracked black leather, worn soft as cloth. Behind a faded photograph of a girl of about 10, Cordy found a small brass key, no bigger than the top joint of her thumb. In the photograph, the girl sat up on the seat of a tractor squinting into the sun. Stamped into the head of it, worn but plain, the number 47. She got into the Buick and drove the 3 hours east to Lincoln and did not stop the whole way. Exactly as she had driven away from this town 35 years before. Except that this time, going the same direction down the same long road, she could not have told you whether she was driving toward the past or driving clear out the far side of it. She only knew that her hands rested steady on the wheel for the first time in days, and that somewhere ahead of her, behind one small steel door among a wall of them, her father had left a thing he had never once managed to say to her living face. In the dark, it had waited 10 years and then 25 more. The station was still there on the south end of Lincoln, smaller than she remembered, the way the places of your youth always are. She parked and went in past the ticket window and the rows of plastic chairs. The lockers were along the back wall where they had always been, banks of dull steel, most of them standing open and empty now in the age of the cell phone. She walked the rows reading the numbers, 43, 45, and then 40 shut, with a small paper tag yellowed in its frame. She could not read it until she was close. When she was close, she saw it was a label in her father's square block hand, faded but plain. It did not say her name. It did not say a date. It said one word, the word from the margin, still. Cordy stood in front of the door with the little brass key warming in her closed fist. For a moment she could not make herself put it in the lock, because once she did, whatever her father had spent 10 years of Sundays saying to an empty room would finally be said to her, and there would be no unhearing it. She put the key in the lock. The key turned without a fight, as though the lock had been oiled and kept against this very day. The little steel door swung open. Inside was a cardboard box, soft and gone gray at the corners. On top of the box, folded once, lay one good winter coat from 1981. The wool smelled of dust and of the cedar block someone had set beside it to keep the moths off. Cordy lifted the coat out with both hands. Underneath it, the box was full of packets, small ones, manila envelopes, each no bigger than a folded letter, each sealed and dated in her father's square block hand. There were more than she could count standing there, dozens of them. The earliest she could see was marked the fall of 1981. The one nearest the top was marked the spring of 1991. She sank down onto a bench against the wall of plastic chairs, the coat across her knees, and she opened the first one. It was a single sheet, folded in thirds, written in pencil on the back of a co-op way ticket. It was not in numbers, it was in words. More words than she had ever known her father to put together at one time. And the voice that came up off the page was a voice she had not heard in 35 years. Cordy, it is the first Sunday since you went. I do not have your address yet. Earl, says Omaha, I am going to write these anyhow, and put them where I can think of you, sitting to read them. There is a thing I should have stood up for in 81, when your mother said, and there the sentence stopped. It simply stopped, the pencil lifted, and the next line began somewhere else entirely. It was the kind of October that smells like rain that won't come. The cottonwood by the south bin had already gone to yellow. I weighed 11 loads. I am telling you the weather because I do not have the other words yet. Maybe I will have them by spring. Cordy turned the sheet over. The other side was full. I want you to understand a thing about a scale, her father had written. A scale does not care what you wish a load weighed. It does not care if you are tired, or if the man is your friend, or if the price is bad that year. It tells the truth. It tells the same truth to every man who drives onto it. I gave 40 years to telling that truth. And the one time it mattered most, in my own front hall, I stood there and said not one true word. I let them put my own daughter out the door. I have weighed that against everything since. It does not balance. It will not balance. I do not write these to be forgiven. There is no counterweight for it. I write them to count you every Sunday, the way I counted everything else. Tare, gross, net. You were never the empty weight, Cordy. You were the net. You were the thing that was actually there. The letter ended near the bottom of the page. I will sit at the weigh office on Sunday afternoons, 3 to 4. I do not expect you. But a man ought to be where he says he will be in case. The kettle is on the shelf above the scale. I keep tea in it. It will be there if you come. Cordy sat very still. She did not cry, not yet. The thing was too large for crying. Around her the bus station went on with its small business. A woman called a gate change over the speaker. A boy slept across 3 plastic chairs with a backpack for a pillow. None of them knew that a woman on the end bench was holding the first kind word her father had managed to send her in 35 years. None of them knew he had been dead for 34 of them. Cordy folded the letter back along its creases, the way he would have. She held it in her lap with both hands flat on top of it, the way you hold a thing down that might otherwise lift and be gone. She did not read the rest in the bus station. She could not. She put the coat back over the box and carried it out to the Buick with both arms. The way you carry a thing that is heavier than its weight. She drove the 3 hours back west to Cordwood with it on the seat beside her. The sun went down ahead and to the left, the way it does on that road. In fall it laid long shadows of the power poles across the asphalt at even intervals, one after another, like marks in a margin. Cordy drove and did not turn on the radio. She had driven this road once before with everything she owned, going the other way, certain that no one behind her was sorry to see her go. She knew better now. The knowing did not fix the 35 years, but it changed which direction she was driving in, even on a road that ran perfectly straight. She read the packets there in the weigh office over the better part of 2 weeks. 1 or 2 an evening by the lamp, with the cat warm on the tearplate and the prairie dark pressing the windows. She did not rush them. She had the feeling that they were the last conversation she would ever have with her father, and you do not rush the last of a thing. He had not written every week. There were gaps, and the gaps told their own story. In a packet from the winter of 1983, the hand unsteady. He had written about a drive. I took the truck to Omaha on Saturday. I had your street from a man at the co-op who knew a man. I found the building. I sat across the road from it from noon until it got dark. I saw a light come on in a window on the third floor, and I told myself it was yours. I could not make myself cross the road and knock. I am a coward in exactly one direction, Cordy, and it is the one that matters. I drove home in the dark and weighed nothing the next week worth writing down. He had underlined no part of it. He had simply set it down, the way he set down a weight, and moved on to the next Sunday. In a packet from 1985, he apologized for missing 3 Sundays running. The hip again, he wrote, and the weather, and an old man's pride which does not like to sit in a cold room and be seen waiting. I will tell you the truth, since this is the one place I tell it. There are Sundays I do not want to come. There are Sundays the wanting to has gone out of me, and it is only the having said would that brings me down the road. I have decided that is all right. A promise you keep only on the easy days is not a promise. It is a mood. He was not a saint in these letters. He was only a man doing a hard small thing over and over, longer than most men would have kept it up. And in a packet from the fall of 1987, there was a thing that was almost lightness. He wrote about the corn that year, the moisture running high, the farmers anxious. He wrote a line she read 3 times. I taught you to bite a kernel when you were 8 years old. You stood on the blue bucket. You got it right the first time and looked up at me so pleased. I did not make enough of it. I have thought about that small failure more than a man ought to think about a thing so small. If you are reading this, go bite a kernel. Tell me what it says. I will hear you. Cordy set that one down and went to the platform. She picked a kernel out of the cracks in the old wood and bit it, dry and sharp, under 13. She said the number out loud to the empty room before she knew she was going to. There was one packet she came back to more than once. It was from the winter of 1984, and it was not about her at all. It was about her mother. You will want to hate her, and I will not stop you, her father had written, but I knew her before you did. She buried a boy in 1957, a year before you came, 3 days old, and she never spoke his name again, not once, not even to me. She decided after that to never let a thing get close enough to be lost again. She was wrong to turn it on you. But she did not start out hard, Cordy. The world made her into a hard tool, and then it handed her a soft thing to hold. I am not asking you to forgive her. I am asking you to know the weight she carried. A man should not be the only one in this family who gets counted fair. Cordy read that one with her hand over her mouth. She had never known about the boy. She set the packet down and sat a long while with a brother she had never been told she had. In a packet from the fall of 1989, he wrote about the last day the elevator ran. They pulled the spur this week, he wrote. I weighed the last of the harvest before they did. 47 cars in one shift. My hands are not young, and I felt every one of them. The big terminal out on the interstate can do that before lunch and never see a farmer's face. Maybe that is progress. I am too old to know. But I will tell you what we lose, since no one else will write it down. We lose the part where a man hauls in what he grew, and another man reads him an honest number to his face, and they both stand there a second in the truth of it. That is not in the price of corn. It never was. It does not show up on any books but these. Cordy read it twice. She understood then that the second ledger and the first had never really been 2 different things. He had been counting her the same way he counted everything, fairly, to her face when he could, in the margins when he could not. She understood 3 things across those 2 weeks, and they came to her in order, each one larger than the last. The first was simple. It was the stone she had carried in her chest for 35 years, and now it lifted. Her father had not put her out of that house. He had failed to stop it, which is a different thing. He had known the difference, and he had spent the rest of his life on the wrong side of it on purpose, paying. He had not stopped loving her. He had never once stopped. The second was harder. He had waited. Every Sunday 3 to 4 for 10 years an old man had walked to a cold room, put a kettle on, sat in a chair by a dead scale and waited. He had waited for a daughter who lived 3 hours east and did not come. She had been in Omaha the whole time, close enough to drive in a morning. She had not known to come. She had believed the silence meant he agreed with her mother. The silence had meant the opposite, and no one had ever told her, because the one man who could have told her had decided he had lost the right to speak. The third came last, and it had no edges, and she would carry it the rest of her life. Somewhere in the world, for the whole length of her grown life, there had been a person counting her, marking her Sundays, saving a kernel for her years, holding a locker open against a coat she never came back for. She had spent 35 years certain she was a woman nobody had ever truly seen. And the whole time, 3 hours west, she had been the most carefully hid thing in a county full of grain. She had never been invisible. She had only never been shown. It was near the bottom of the box, in the packet marked the spring of 1991, that she found the deed. It was a single folded document, soft with handling, and stapled to it was a short note in the now shakier hand of a sick man. The deed was for the old home quarter. The 160 acres her family had farmed and then lost in 1986, when the bank took it the way the bank took everyone. The note explained it the way her father explained everything, plainly. Without weight, he had bought it back. Quietly, a little at a time over the years after the sale, paying it down from his pension and his weighmaster savings, telling no one. "I could not give your mother back the years," he had written, "and I could not give you back the door. But the ground is the one thing they can take that a man can sometimes buy again. It is in your name, Cordy. It has been in your name since the spring of '88. I did not know how to tell you. I am telling you now, the only way I have left. The land, with the cropland, leased out year to year, had been appraised that winter at $327,000. Cordy held the deed and did not think about the money, not really. The money was the smallest thing in the box. The money was only the proof of how long a quiet man can keep a promise that nobody asked him to make. Garrett came back to the weigh office on a gray afternoon, after the word had got around town the way the word does. He did not come with a briefcase this time. He came in an old jacket. He stood in the doorway and did not sit, and he said he had heard there were letters. Cordy did not argue with him, and she did not soften toward him. She went to the box and took out the packet marked 1985 and held it out across the desk. "This one is partly yours," she said. "Read it here, I'm not letting it leave the room." Garrett read it, standing up. She knew the part he reached when his face changed, because she had read it herself the week before. It was the part where their father wrote about a Sunday in the fall of 1985. Garrett, 19 then and home from the state college, had come down to the weigh office looking for him. The boy had stood in the door and asked one thing: "Where's Cordy?" Just that. "Where's Cordy?" Like he had finally worked up the nerve and their father had written it down. I did not answer him. I had no answer that was both true and bearable, so I gave him none. He went away. That is one more silence I have to carry. But the boy asked after his sister. I want it written down somewhere that the boy asked. Garrett read it twice. Cordy watched him read it twice. Then he folded the sheet along its old creases and set it down on the desk, square to the edge, the way their father would have, the way none of them could help. He did not say he was sorry. The Whitlows did not have the machinery for that. A sorry from Garrett would have rung false, and they both knew it. He stood a moment with his hand flat on the folded paper. Then he took his hand back and he turned, and he walked out to his car, and he drove off east toward Lincoln. He did not say goodbye. But he had asked after his sister once at 19 in a cold doorway. Now it was written down somewhere, he had read it. And Cordy understood that for Garrett, that was the whole of what he had. That Sunday afternoon Cordy was in the weigh office at 3 o'clock. She had not planned it. Her feet had brought her there, the way her hands sharpened the pencils, the way her teeth had known the corn. But she put herself above the scale, the same kettle. She found there was still a twist of old tea in the tin beside it, dry as dust, and she made a cup of it anyway and let it sit. At 3:10 a truck pulled into the gravel. An old man she half remembered, with a load of seed corn he wanted weighed before he hauled it to his daughter's place across the county. He asked was she open. He asked when a man could come by. Cordy looked at the clock on the wall, the clock that had stopped in 1989 and that she had not wound. 3 to 4, she said, Sunday afternoons. The words were out of her before she knew they were her father's words. She heard them land in the small room. She weighed the man's corn and read him his number and wrote it in the new logbook. When he had gone, she sat down in her father's chair with the cooling cup of tea and looked at the empty doorway. For 10 years of Sundays an old man had sat in this chair, looking out that door, and she understood at last that she had not come to the weigh office to find out what he had left her. She had come to take his chair. She had come to start sitting the Sundays he could no longer sit. The spring came on slow that year. the way it does on the high plains, with false starts and one last hard frost in April. By the second week of May, the cottonwoods along the south fence had leafed out green. The meadowlarks were back, and the way office of the Cordwood Co-op elevator number 2 stood open to the morning light, its windows washed for the first time in 35 years. It looked different now. It looked kept. Cordy had spent the winter on it. She had scraped and painted the clapboard back to the old earth yellow it had worn when she was a girl. She matched the color off a flake she found under the eave. She had oiled the great Toledo scale until the beam swung clean and true. She had washed the dust of decades off the windows and swept the floor and set the coffee cup back on the sill, rinsed now with a sprig of something green in it. Some nights she worked until the lamp was the only light for a quarter mile. Earl would see it from his cottage and come down with his cane and sit in the second chair. He told her where a thing had stood, what color a thing had been, the way you help someone build back a room from your own memory of it. He remembered the calendar had hung on a particular nail. He remembered the kettle's exact shelf. Between the two of them, the room came back. But she had left two things exactly as they were. On the inside wall by the door, she hung the two crossed boards her father had nailed up in 1989. The red was still on every nailhead. Beneath them she set a small brass plate that read only, "The door he closed." She had wanted the closing kept along with everything else. A thing is not whole if you keep only the warm half of it. She had learned that much. She had become, over that winter, the weighmaster of Cordwood. Not the way her father had been. The elevator would never run again, and she did not pretend it would. But on Saturday mornings, from 9 to 11, the town had started a small farmer's market in the gravel lot. A dozen tables of eggs and honey and early greens. Cordy ran the old scale for them, weighing out produce by the pound for anybody who asked, free of charge, and a fresh logbook with her own square hand learning to draw the lines level. She kept Saturday mornings on purposes. Her father had kept the Sundays. She would not take his hours from him. She would keep her own, beside his, the way you set a second chair at a table without moving the first. There was a young man named Toby Hayne who set up at the market most weeks. He was 24, trying to make a go of 120 acres his grandfather had left him, and a banknote he could barely carry. He brought eggs and, later in the season, sweet corn. He weighed everything twice because he did not yet trust his own hands. Cordy watched him the way Earl had watched her. One Saturday in June she weighed his corn and read him the number. She saw the worry sitting on him like a wet coat, and she did a thing then that set the rest in motion. She wrote his name in a different book that evening. She had been looking for the first one. On the 8th of May, which was a Saturday that year, Cordy opened her father's old logbook to its last written page. The date meant something. It was 45 years to the day since she had carried a suitcase out of a front hall at 3:30 in the afternoon. She read the top of the page the way she had read it the first day. October the 14th, 1989, and below it, pressed deep into the paper, the single word, Cordy. She had understood, somewhere across the winter, what the other word meant. The one he had written in the margins all those years, the one on the locker tag, the one she had not been able to read. Still. Not still as in quiet, still as in yet, still as in here, still as in I am still your father, you are still my daughter, the count is still open, it always will be. She took up a pencil. She did not sharpen it to 2.5 inches. She laid the steel square against the page and drew one line clean and level, the first line she had ever drawn in his book, and under his last word she wrote her first, May 8, 2026. Still, she closed the book and set it on its rack where it would stay. She noticed later that day that she had stopped sharpening the pencils. For 35 years her hands had honed every pencil they touched down to exactly 2.5 inches and set it aside untouched, a small useless ritual she had never understood. She understood it now. It was the length of the pencil stubs in the cup on her father's desk. They had been worn down by a man who wrote small and pressed hard and used a thing all the way up before he let it go. Her hands had been keeping his measure all along. The only piece of him they had been allowed to keep. They did not need to keep it in secret anymore. Now she used the pencils. She wore them down herself, drawing level lines, and when one got too short to hold, she dropped it in the cup with his. She used a part of the land money that spring to do the one thing she was sure of. She set up a small fund at the bank in town, in her father's name, the Cordelia Whitlow Weighing Fund. She put enough into it that it would outlast her. It gave out small grants. $500, $2,000 at the most. To young farmers in the 4 counties around Cordwood who were carrying a hard year, the way her father's neighbors had carried 1986 and lost. The first grant went to Toby Hain, $2,000 against his fall note, handed across the way office desk with no ceremony. The boy looked at the number written in his favor and could not speak for a moment. It was not enough money to save a farm. Cordy knew that. It had not been enough in 1986 either, but it was enough to tell a person, in the one language a farmer fully trusts, which is the language of a number written down in your favor, that somebody was keeping account of him, that somebody had him on the books, that he was not whatever the bank said, the empty weight. She had a plaque made for the outside of the weigh office, beside the door, small and plain, the kind a man would not be embarrassed by. It gave his name and his years at the scale, and underneath the only line she had been certain of from the start. Halbert Whitlow, weighmaster 1954 to 1989. He counted everything, and he counted you. Earl came to see it the day she hung it. He was slower that spring. He used the cane on the good days now as well as the bad. He stood in front of the little plaque a long while and read it more than once. He did not make a speech. Earl had worked beside Hal Whitlow for 40 years and had learned the man's economy with words the way you learn a dialect. He just looked at the plaque. Then he looked at Cordy, weighing out a flat of bedding plants for a young woman at the market table, reading off the weight, drawing her level line. He'd be proud, Earl said. That was all. Word of the plaque and the letters and the fund got around the 4 counties the way such things do, slow and then complete. People began to come by the weigh office who had no corn to weigh. An old woman brought a photograph of her own father at the scale in 1962 and asked Cordy to keep a copy. A man Cordy did not know left a sack of seed potatoes on the step with a note that said only, "For the boy you helped, pass it on." The market grew through the summer from a dozen tables to 20. Mavis Crandall started coming Saturdays to pour coffee from a 30-cup urn. Lou Deming, the young mayor, stood in the lot one morning and looked at the kept building and the busy tables and said, half to himself, that the council had nearly let it fall. He did not finish the thought. He did not have to. The town had decided something about itself, quietly the way a town does. And the deciding had a yellow building at the center of it, and a scale that told the truth, and a woman drawing level lines in a book. There was one account that did not balance, and Cordy let it stay that way, because some things will not, and pretending otherwise is its own kind of lie. Her mother was still living in a nursing home down in Lincoln. 91 years old now and mostly turned away from the world. Cordy had driven down once in the deep of the winter with the first packet folded in her purse. She had sat in the visitor's chair in a warm room that smelled of disinfectant and lunch, and she had tried to find a way to begin. She had not brought the old fight with her. She had only wanted to say that she knew now, that she had read the letters, that she understood at last what the silence in that front hall had cost everyone in it. Her mother had looked at her a long moment. Something crossed the old woman's face that might have been knowing and might have been only the weather of a tired mind. And then she had turned her head to the window and would not turn it back. A nurse came and said gently that some days were better than others. Cordy had sat a while longer with her unsaid thing, and then she had gathered her coat and gone. She had not taken the packet out of her purse. Some doors, she understood now, do not open from the side you say you are standing on, but in the spring she made a copy of that first packet anyway. It was the one from the fall of 1981, where her father wrote that a scale only tells the truth. She mailed it to the nursing home with no note of her own attached. She did not expect an answer. No answer came. She did not write again, and she did not wait by the mailbox, and she did not let the not answering undo the rest. A daughter can forgive a father she never got to face and still not know how to reach a mother who is right there. Both of those were true at once. She let them both be true. Garrett she did not hear from for half a year. Then, in the late fall, the bank in town telephoned. An anonymous gift had come into the Halbert Whitlow weighing fund by cashier's check drawn on a Lincoln bank in the amount of $10,000. There was no name on it. There did not need to be. Cordy thanked the banker and hung up the phone. She stood a moment in the doorway of the weigh office, looking east toward Lincoln, toward the city where her brother sold other people's houses and had once at 19 asked a cold doorway where his sister was. She did not call him. She did not write to him. Some things between people are said best by not being said. The Whitlows had always been fluent in that grammar. This was a sentence she chose to leave him in peace to have spoken. She only added the gift to the books in her own square hand and drew the line under it level and true. The last Saturday of that season was a bright cold one in October, a year near enough since the morning Mavis Crandall had telephoned a custodian in North Platte. The market had thinned down to the hardy few. Cordy weighed the last load of the day near 11 o'clock. A farmer's pickup heaped with the season's final corn, brought not because he needed the number. The men had taken to bringing her the last of things, the way you bring something to a person you have decided to keep. She set the truck on the platform and read the gross. 47,420 pounds. She had him pull off and read the tare. 22,180. She did the arithmetic the way her hands had always known it, gross, less tare. She wrote the net in the logbook in pencil, level and clean. 25,240 pounds of corn. The empty weight taken out and what was actually there set down and counted. It is a simple thing, a net weight. It is only the truth of what a thing carries when you stop counting the part that was never the point. The morning sun came up over the rail bed and through the washed west window. It came the way it had come through a dusty one on an October afternoon a lifetime before. It lay warm across the floor of the weigh office, across the old scale, across her father's logbook on its rack. And while Cordy was writing, the orange cat came in off the gravel the way it did, without a glance at anyone. It crossed the floor and jumped up onto the platform and lay down on the small steel tare plate in the warm and folded its paws and began to purr. Cordy looked at it over the top of her glasses. She did not run it off. Some men count grain to keep their hands busy while they wait for someone to come home. I've read many stories about people who inherited money. This one stuck with me because of the pencils. Cordy spent 35 years sharpening each pencil to 5 centimeters without knowing why, and it turned out her hands only held the same length her father had sharpened his pencils to. I inherited a similar habit from my father. I didn't realize I still had it until I wrote this story. That's the part of these stories I can't forget. The love we hold in our hands before reason realizes it. Scales are man-made, pencils aren't. Somewhere out there, there might still be someone counting on you without your knowledge. A grandparent, a neighbor, someone at a desk in a small town. If they're still alive, this week might be the perfect time to let them know you've realized it. The people in this story aren't real, but that part of it is.